Hello, I'm Marcel Wieder. Welcome to Season 2 of The Point. Today on The Point, the longest federal election in modern Canadian history is now over. Newly elected Liberal Arif Virani joins us to talk about his campaign experience and the transition from candidate to Member of Parliament. And what do the results of the federal election mean for Ontario? I'm joined by Aurora Strategy's Craig Hughson to gain some insights. All that and more on this edition of The Point. Arif Virani was our guest last season. He was the candidate in the riding of Parkdale High Park. He won the NDP stronghold against Peggy Nash, the former NDP finance critic. First of all, congratulations on that win.
Thank you very much.
How does it feel?
It feels terrific. I mean, it's very satisfying. It's rewarding. It's exhilarating. It's a little bit surreal, even though it's about 8 days old now. It's a number of things. A lot of emotions sort of going through my head, and sort of the family's excited. My extended family's very excited, and people in the riding are excited as well.
78 days, one of the longest campaigns on record, and we met even before that. You had the nomination prior to that, and you were campaigning. What did it feel like through that marathon campaign?
It was a bit exhausting, to be candid. I remember around Labor Day thinking, wow, another 6 weeks of this. This has already taken a bit of a toll. At times it felt like it was never ending. Mm-hmm. It took a toll of sort of, there's an element of physical fatigue. My feet hurt a lot at the end of the day.
How many shoes did you go through?
I went through about a couple of pairs, but I tried to constantly replace my New Balance running shoes, and I'm not trying to plug New Balance, but they were phenomenal shoes, and I kept going back to them. I tried fancy dress shoes, I tried fancy walking shoes, but at the end of the day, these sort of marathon type running shoes were my go-to, and they were terrific for me. And it was, there was this definitely a physical toll, and as well as sort of needing to be mentally engaged from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. every single night. You wanted downtime. I struggled with not being able to catch up with enough of the Blue Jays games, watching the 30-minute versions instead of the full versions. So there were some challenges, obviously, but it proved to be, the long campaign, I think, proved to be helpful, both locally and I think nationally. Mm-hmm. And I say that insofar as, again, taking on a well-known challenger, a well-known incumbent as a first-time challenger. People got, 7-8 days to get to know me, whether that was at events or at the doors. And I think people also had 7-8 days to get to know Justin Trudeau. I knew him from the past, as I mentioned to you in our last interview. I knew what he was capable of. I knew him as a person who was very conversant on the issues and had great leadership skills and great judgment, but I think Canadians needed to see that for themselves, and I think over 78 days they clearly did, particularly in the last 3 weeks of the campaign.
Now, somebody told me that you knocked on virtually every door in your riding, something well over 80% of the doors.
I think that's right. I mean, it was necessary. I think, again, as somebody who is a challenger, I think that's what you need to do. I, again, benefited from having been nominated last November, so I started knocking on doors in late January. But I think people appreciated that, because by the end they started to say, well, I met you 2 or 3 times now, and at the subway stop or at the farmer's market, you came to my door. So I think they at least appreciated that sort of tenacity.
So Prime Minister-elect Trudeau was the next day at subway stations in his riding and meeting people without a huge entourage and just saying thank you, similar to what you're saying that you did in your riding.
And I think that's a testament to the man himself. I mean, it's quite incredible. I was getting fatigued traveling an 8 square kilometer riding called Parkdale High Park. This man was traveling coast to coast to coast around the country, being apart from Sophie and his 3 kids. And the very next day, he's at a subway station in downtown Montreal. It's just tremendous in terms of his commitment, his level of engagement. And we take our cues from that, right? I always try and take good cues from people at any elected level in terms of what has worked for them and what is a successful sort of recipe. And, people had told me be out there regularly. And when I saw Justin Trudeau the next day doing it, I thought, well, I know what I'm doing this Saturday. And, taking my kids in tow is a way of sort of getting them actively involved, because, they certainly miss their dad. So,
understandably. Now, the riding itself is being held by Peggy Nash, who is considered, like I said, at the top, a heavyweight in the NDP. She's former party president. She held the finance critic role, and she's been successful over the years. Now, taking her on, a lot of people were not sure if this was the best riding to choose from.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because on a couple of fronts. One is that, first of all, I have a ton of respect for Peggy Nash. I have a ton of respect for anyone who's committed to serve and to serve successfully. She dedicated 6 of the last 9 years serving as the Member of Parliament for that riding. But I also appreciate that, the riding had been won twice and lost twice by Ms. Nash, right?
Right.
So it went Liberal NDP in each of the last 4 elections, so 04, 06, 08, and 2011. So that metronome has proven consistent once again. It's flipped once again. I hope to ensure that, that's more of a longevity to the current run. But in terms of sort of taking on Ms. Nash, sure, it was definitely daunting. There's no doubt it was daunting. But I tend to see things as the glass is half full. I looked at the historic track record. I know about what I'm capable of as, in terms of my litigation practice for the last 14 years, in terms of my own sort of work ethic. And I knew how people were responding to me. And they responded at that nomination. We had 1,630 people vote at a nomination meeting in a downtown Toronto riding, which was almost unheard of in Liberal Party circles. So you could sense that there was both an interest in politics, but also an interest in the Liberal Party's fortunes in Parkdale High Park. And I used that as good momentum and carried that forward into the election campaign. And was it daunting? Sure. Or were there times when I thought it wouldn't go so well? Definitely. I mean, that's the ebb and flow of any campaign. But I remained optimistic in terms of also sort of my social justice orientation and what I brought to the table. So when people learned about, me being a refugee, when they learned about me being a war crimes prosecutor, when they learned about constitutional law and human rights law as a background, when they learned about me being a father of a young family, being an active community volunteer, that all had good traction at the door. So unless people were bold-faced lying to me, which as it turns out they weren't, there was a sense of, there is some traction and some resonance for both what I'm bringing to the table and also what the party is bringing to the table in terms of policies. And as more of those got revealed, it became more and more of a sort of a steady momentum that was building.
So let's talk about the issues that you faced at the door in your riding. What were people talking to you during the election about?
So they talked to me a lot about the environment. They talked to me a lot about infrastructure. I mean, Parkdale High Park is Bloor West, it's Roncesvalles, it's High Park, it's the Junction. They talked to me about rail safety. But overarching concerns were the environment and how Canada had really lost its way on a very critical file for both my constituents, but also for the nation, and also about just basic infrastructure, how people were just anxious and stressed about their commuting times, the amount of time they were being spending time stuck in traffic, and also about how they didn't appreciate how they didn't understand why Stephen Harper wasn't appreciating the detrimental economic impact that was having, right? For an ostensible economic manager to not realize how our GDP was being depleted by people literally being stuck in traffic. They found that puzzling, and they just wanted infrastructure to be built, particularly in terms of transit, that would actually get people or goods to market faster, or people to work faster, or people to school faster.
So talking about the NDP, in the last election, we saw something called Layton mania. In the last weeks of the campaign, Jack Layton's campaign caught on fire, huge crowds, a real sense of momentum, and as a result, they had a huge win, not a government, but they became the official opposition, and the rest is history with regard to Mr. Layton, unfortunately. This year we're seeing with Justin Trudeau a resurrection, I guess, of Trudeau Mania 2. With when did you sense things were kind of changing, the dynamics were changing? I understand that Mr. Trudeau came into your riding in the last week of the campaign.
You could analyze it from a couple of ways. I think sort of that the steam that Justin brought to the campaign and sort of in what he was doing for the party, dates back to his time when he was first elected as leader. I think we were always confident in it. I think more Canadians need to be exposed to him to understand sort of what he brought to the table. It was definitely galvanizing. It was definitely tremendous in terms of the momentum. I think with each and every debate, he got stronger and stronger. The French debates were flawless. I think, and that actually brought back a lot of nostalgia for me because Justin, Mr. Trudeau and I know each other from the McGill Debating Union 24 years ago. And I remember very clearly that his aptitude and his skills at debating in French were far and above all of the rest of us. There were many Anglophones at McGill, for example. So I found that kind of comforting and a bit nostalgic. But in terms of sort of like a palpable shift, it was almost around sort of 3 weeks left, 2.5 weeks left. I was spending time in parts of the riding that hitherto had not been sort of strong Liberal polling areas. We had sort of different areas where we knew we would do better than not. But places like Parkdale and the Junction, people were stopping me in the street. They were talking to me about both myself as an individual, but also about Justin Trudeau by name. There were high fives exchanged. People were calling out his name, smiling. That excitement started to sort of take hold. And I think people realized that there was a movement afoot for change, and that Justin Trudeau could be the harbinger of that change. And it was very, very encouraging. It was great for me. It was great for my team. It was great for the volunteers because people sense something moving. And I think his visit to the riding in the last week, we were down in Parkdale on Queen Street at a bar called the Cadillac Lounge, and it was packed, absolutely packed. When I got there, they were still screening people to get in, and there were maybe 200 people in line outside just waiting to get in, and that to me was a terrific sign of something afoot, that people could sort of taste it, so to speak.
Now you're going off to Ottawa next week for your orientation and waiting to hear when the House will be recalled. What are going to be your priorities when you're up in Ottawa for your constituents in Parkdale High Park?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's I've got sort of my pet issues. I've got, I think, issues that are important to the riding, and when they nicely coalesce, it's terrific. There have been people who are talking to me during the campaign and have been talking to me sort of nonstop since about the Syrian refugee crisis. And again, you'll recollect I came here as a refugee from Uganda in 1972, and I said very candidly to many people at the doors, at a Rogers TV debate, et cetera, that had the previous government, the previous Conservative government, been in power in 1972 when I was in jeopardy with my family in Idi Amin's Uganda. It's unlikely that we would have arrived if that kind of political orientation was in power in 1972. And I'm very thankful for the opportunities that were provided to me and my family and 7,000 other Ugandan Asians here in this country. And I want to make sure that, we pay that forward. And so what that means for me personally, and again, it's also a concern for my riding, is that people want Syrian refugees to be brought to this country as fast as possible. We've made that commitment. I know that there are logistical hurdles we need to cross. We know we need to galvanize forces. We need to coordinate things both with Immigration Canada, potentially with military assistance, et cetera. But where there's a will, there's a way. I take Mr. Trudeau at face value when he said he's committed to that. I'm very committed to it. So that's something that I will actively be trying to work on and promote. But it goes beyond that because it's not just bringing refugees into the country and then sort of leaving them to sort of fend for themselves. It's about, for example, restoring the IFH, the Interim Federal Health Program, where you get medical care provided to all refugee applicants, for example. It's about settlement services and ensuring they're adequately funded so we have an ability to house, train, find work for newcomers to the country. So those are some immediate objectives. I also have a macro sort of step back objective which deals with my background as a constitutional lawyer and a human rights advocate. I want to see justice and legal and human rights policies corrected. We've spent 9.5 years sort of in a bit of a never land where approaches to law and order have been bigger jails and longer mandatory minimums and a series of sort of setbacks by the Supreme Court of Canada, thankfully, who are acting as the last backstop to protect people's civil liberties and charter rights. I want to be part of a government that's going to be at the forefront of leading in advance and protecting people's charter rights and values and civil liberties going forward and not relying upon the courts to sort of be that safeguard. We should be leading ourselves. So those are some of the objectives.
I've been chatting with newly elected Liberal MP for Parkdale High Park, Arif Virani. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
Craig Hughson is a former Chief of Staff at Queen's Park and a former Liberal candidate. He's now principal at the Aurora Strategy Group. Thanks for joining us, Craig. Lots to talk about.
It's been an exciting couple of weeks.
Yes, so we now have the results from the federal election, and in Ontario, 80 of the seats went Liberal. Quite a turnaround from the previous election. How do you find that happened over the last few weeks?
Well, they say a week is an eternity in politics, and with an 11-week campaign, we certainly saw several eternities play out. We had the start of the campaign where Justin Trudeau was in third place, and some had written him off and thought this was going to be a two-horse race right to the finish line between Mulcair and Harper. Obviously, hindsight being what it is, we saw that clearly wasn't the case. And Harper ran a campaign where he got distracted from their key strong, stable economy message that they were really good at sticking to in the past. And I think that certainly hurt Harper. Mulcair ran a campaign that tried to convince Canadians he was the government in waiting and played it safe, and then got outflanked by the Liberals on the balanced budget piece that I think was detrimental to the NDP. And a lot of their key voters, or normal voters, probably dripped over to the Liberals. And we look at the huge change in seats and obviously change in government, but the one thing that really didn't change was Harper's vote tally. He went from 39% of the vote in the 2011 election, where he formed a pretty strong majority, to this campaign where he still got 32% of the vote. So core conservatives, true blue believers, still voted Stephen Harper this time around.
But what was more interesting from my perspective was the return of the Liberal voter, the traditional voter who took a pass with Stéphane Dion and Michael Ignatieff, has now appeared to come back to the Liberal fold. And those are the soft Tories and the soft NDP voters, and now they're coming back.
Yeah, in healthy numbers that even Chrétien didn't see in Quebec, for example. So they came back, and we found some more. The campaign that Justin Trudeau ran was flawless, even with what could have been a scandal near the end. Was handled quickly and took the wind out of the sails when his co-campaign director advised some oil types that how to lobby a future Liberal government, and that was negated before that story caught legs. So everything on the Trudeau campaign went off without a hitch.
One of the things you mentioned just a few moments ago was how the NDP appeared to have been outflanked by the Liberals. And it reminds me of what happened during the provincial election, where Kathleen Wynne outflanked Andrea Horwath and appeared to be the more progressive party than the NDP. And so it seemed that the Trudeau campaign took a page right out of the Kathleen Wynne book.
Well, not surprising, given the amount of cross-pollination between the Kathleen Wynne team and the Justin Trudeau team. Names like David Hurley and Pat Sorbera were quite active and quite influential in making sure that Ontario's message got to the Trudeau team early and often. And I would think every staffer at Queen's Park was voluntold they had to be part of the Trudeau team wherever they were. And it worked.
So what are the messages that you take from this campaign?
Well, first and foremost, the Canadians don't like divisive politics. We saw Harper run on a campaign of fear and talked about canceling people's citizenship, terror hotlines, not talking about hope and optimism and a promise for the future that Trudeau really stuck to. And he said at the outset that he would run a positive campaign and no attack ads, and he really did. And he stuck to it and was rewarded handsomely for it.
Let's talk a little bit more about the impact of this election provincially. And it's no secret that Stephen Harper and Kathleen Wynne didn't get along, and they certainly had enough animosity towards each other during the campaign. Stephen Harper actually went out of his way to attack Kathleen Wynne at stops in Ontario, and Kathleen Wynne, for her part, certainly bashed away at the federal Conservatives. What do you think the relationship is going to be with the new Prime Minister Trudeau?
Well, we certainly have seen our share of Fed bashing from the Ontario Premier, be it our current Premier Wynne or our previous Premier McGuinty. There was no love lost either way in that relationship. So we've already seen Premier-designate Trudeau pay a visit to Queen's Park to visit with Kathleen Wynne. He does owe her a debt of gratitude. How that debt of gratitude will pay into tangible results for Ontario is still yet to be seen, but we will see a very cozy relationship given the amount of support that Wynne and her team dumped into the Trudeau campaign. And she put all her cards on the table and went all in.
So let's shift our focus just slightly. And how does this election impact the provincial PCs and the NDP? I can't recall Patrick Brown out there meeting with Stephen Harper during the campaign or stumping for very many federal Conservative campaigns. And he was a former MP who jumped ship to come over to the province.
He does probably count his lucky stars. He bailed out of Ottawa when he did to seek the Ontario leadership, and is quite happy where he is today, I suspect.
And on the Liberal side, the fact that there's now 80, and most of those seats mirror the seats held by their provincial counterparts, must be a very gratifying sign for Kathleen Wynne and her team.
Well, yes, I expect a Liberal love-in. We're not going to see any Fed bashing or province bashing. One thing that, having been around when Chrétien and was in power, the provincial and federal wing of the Liberal Party didn't always see eye to eye. They didn't get along. They weren't the same people. And the Ottawa Liberals held their nose a little bit about Ontario politics, didn't really care for us. So we have a complete reshuffle of that deck now, and the team is quite united.
Well, we'll see how long that Liberal love-in lasts. I was chatting with Craig Hughson from Aurora Strategy Group. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
On October 19th, Canadians voted for change. After nearly a decade of Conservative rule under Stephen Harper, voters signaled that they were ready and chose Justin Trudeau's Liberals. Despite the political obituaries written and the tombstone ordered, the Liberals performed a near Lazarus-like experience of rising from the proverbial dead in a stunning 78-day election that catapulted the Liberals from third to first with a majority government that few thought were possible. Canadians rejected the politics of fear and division and instead embraced hope and hard work. Liberals swept all the seats in the city of Toronto proper, painting the town red. They also picked up crucial seats in the 905 area just outside the city. And in Ottawa, they won 8 out of the 9 seats in the nation's capital. Conservative cabinet ministers such as Finance Minister Joe Oliver and Immigration Minister Chris Alexander fell under the Liberal steamroller. NDP heavyweight MPs such as Peggy Nash and Paul Dewar also fell victim during election night. 2 key points on the election that no doubt will be debated over the coming months. The first is the return of the Liberal voter. After nearly a decade in the wilderness, Liberal voters who sat on their hands during the Dion and Ignatieff years reconnected with the Liberal Party under Trudeau. The Liberals were also able to distinguish themselves from their Conservative and New Democratic opponents by championing traditional Liberal values of investing in people and services, promoting tolerance and diversity, and real change. The second, more interesting one, is the Wynne factor. Wynne had gone head-to-head with Stephen Harper on a number of issues such as pensions, infrastructure investment, and climate change. She has made the case that the federal government was shortchanging Ontarians. Harper, for his part, has made the Ontario Premier a target of his campaign, pointing out the deficits that they were running. Clearly, there is no love lost between them. In fact, one should recall that Harper refused to meet with Wynne when she took over as Liberal leader and Premier. He then criticized her during the provincial election. That has led Wynne to double down on Trudeau. She has invested personal capital as well as political resources to help the rookie Liberal leader. The relationship between federal and provincial Liberals has always been a bit strained. During the Liberals' heyday federally, they generally looked down at their struggling provincial cousins. It was only when Ontario Liberals started to win under former Premier Dalton McGuinty did they develop a newfound respect. In the last provincial election, Trudeau campaigned actively for Wynne, making a number of appearances with her. Wynne is reciprocating and adding some of her battle-hardened staff to his campaign, as well as 59 members of provincial parliament. The result? Trudeau's Liberals captured 80 of the 121 seats in Ontario. As a former Ontario Progressive Conservative leader Tim Hudak found out, going up against Wynne can be career-limiting. And that's the point. That's all for this edition of The Point. Keep up with the show and follow us on Twitter @WatchThePoint, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. I'm Marcel Wieder.